It begins not with a bang, but with a glitch. A single, pixelated frame in a sea of digital chaos. It was a silence that rang with phantom echoes, a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted just hours before. On the surface, the story was tragically simple: a shooting at a political event, a security team that failed, and a public left searching for answers. But in the digital age, the simplest stories are often the most deceptive. This is not the story you were told. This is the story unfolding behind the redacted reports, the sealed evidence, and the carefully constructed narrative that collapsed under the weight of a single, unedited frame. This is an investigation into a lie and the unsettling question of who built it and why. The idyllic Parkland Common, a place of community gatherings and family picnics, was transformed into the epicenter of a national tragedy. The shocking death of a beloved public figure sent a tremor through the city, a rupture in the ordinary that demanded an immediate, coherent explanation. The authorities, under the blinding glare of media scrutiny and public anguish, provided one with breathtaking speed: Tyler Robinson. His name was etched into the public consciousness before the blood had been washed from the grass. The narrative was clean, efficient, and devastating. A troubled young man, a heated argument earlier that day, a life cut short by a single, catastrophic decision. The gears of justice seemed to turn with reassuring certainty. An arrest was made, a case was built, and a city was offered the solace of closure. But closure, as it turns out, is a fragile construct. In the digital age, every story has a shadow, a parallel narrative written in the code of security cameras, the shaky footage of bystanders, and the whispered suspicions of a public increasingly adept at reading between the lines of official statements. This is the story of that shadow. It is a story of a second runner, a ghost in the machine, a witness who saw too much, and a growing, unsettling conviction that the truth of what happened in Parkland Common is far more complex and far more sinister than we have been led to believe. This is an investigation into the missing evidence, the ignored testimony, and the convenient narrative that threatens to bury a deeper, more disturbing reality. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, the media ecosystem went into overdrive. News helicopters circled overhead, their spotlights cutting white scars into the dark park. Cable news channels filled their screens with somber graphics and talking heads, all grappling to make sense of the senseless. The initial reports were a cacophony of confusion: multiple shooters, a lone gunman, a possible robbery gone wrong. This period of uncertainty, however, was short-lived. Within 48 hours, the story began to crystallize around a single name: Tyler Robinson. Law enforcement sources, speaking on background, began to paint a picture. Robinson, 24, was described as a known entity with a history of minor infractions and simmering resentment. He had been seen in a heated discussion with a victim at a local cafe just hours before the incident. The argument, witnesses said, was intense, though no one could recall the specific subject. It was a thread, and the investigation pulled it. The first piece of tangible evidence presented to the public was a grainy still from a city traffic camera. It showed a blurry figure, face obscured, running from the general direction of the park. The build and clothing, authorities suggested, were consistent with Robinson. Then came the forensics. An item belonging to the victim, found near a park bench, allegedly bore Robinson's fingerprint. The case, as presented, was circumstantial but compelling. It fit a familiar, tragic pattern. The media, hungry for a resolution, largely embraced this narrative. Headlines shifted from "Mystery in Parkland" to "Tragic Conclusion, Suspect in Custody." The public, desperate for an end to the fear and speculation, largely exhaled. The monster had a name and a face. The wheels of justice were turning. On social media, a wave of grief for the victim mingled with vitriol directed at Robinson. Comment sections became digital gallows. The story, it seemed, was over. But at the edges of this digital consensus, cracks began to form. They started not with professional journalists, but with amateur sleuths and concerned citizens. In online forums and niche YouTube channels, users began dissecting every available piece of public information. They created detailed maps of the park, timelining the events based on 911 calls. They enhanced and stabilized the few seconds of bystander footage that had leaked online. And it was in this digital crucible that the first and most significant anomaly was discovered. The official narrative hinged on a single trajectory of flight. Tyler Robinson, the argument, the shot, the flight west towards the city streets where he was later apprehended. This was the clean line of the story. But the totality of the digital evidence, painstakingly collated from dozens of sources, suggested a messier, more complicated reality. Among the chaos of videos uploaded in the hours after the shooting was a clip filmed by a college student named Chloe Abrams. She had been filming a TikTok video with friends when the first pop, initially mistaken for a firecracker, echoed across the park. Her phone, still recording, dropped to her side, capturing a shaky, low-angle view of the ground and the legs of people scrambling for cover. It was this unassuming, chaotic footage that would become the cornerstone of the counter-narrative. Deep in the background of the frame, at the extreme upper left corner, a figure is seen moving. He is not panicking. He is not crouching. He is sprinting with a powerful, determined gait, cutting north through a cluster of oak trees, away from the main paths and the commotion. This individual, designated by online investigators as Runner B, moves with a purpose that is qualitatively different from the other fleeing figures. His flight is not one of blind terror, but of directed escape. When this fragment of footage is stabilized, enlarged, and run through enhancement algorithms, details emerge that challenge the official story. The build is broader, more solid through the shoulders and chest than the lanky frame of Tyler Robinson. The clothing, a dark, knee-length coat with a distinct light-colored stripe on the sleeve, is not the gray hoodie Robinson was reportedly wearing. The timing of this figure's appearance, calculated through cross-referencing other videos, places him in motion within seconds of the shot, but on a vector completely opposite to the one the police had documented. The existence of Runner B was not, in itself, proof of anything. It could have been another panicked bystander. But it was an anomaly, a data point that did not fit the model. And in any rigorous investigation, anomalies are not dismissed, they are interrogated. Why was this figure never mentioned in official press briefings? Had he ever been identified and cleared? The police department, when queried, provided a boilerplate response. The investigation remains open, but we are confident that the individual in custody is the primary suspect. We will not comment on specific, unverified pieces of evidence circulating online. This dismissal of a publicly available piece of the puzzle only served to fuel the growing skepticism. As the digital scrutiny intensified, a name began to surface in connection with Runner B. It was a name known to those within the victim's inner circle but absent from the initial news cycles: Lance Twigg. Twigg was a business associate of the victim, a man described by former colleagues as charismatic but volatile. Rumors of a fractured partnership and significant financial disagreements began to trickle out, though they were never picked up by mainstream outlets. The nature of their disagreement was murky, involving a disputed contract and allegations of misappropriated funds, a motive far more concrete and potentially explosive than Robinson's alleged heated argument. The connection to the video evidence came from a different angle. A gas station situated a block north of Parkland Common had a high-definition camera facing the street. Footage from that camera, time-stamped approximately 4 minutes after the time of the shooting, shows a man matching Twigg's general description walking briskly past. He keeps his head down, his face partially obscured by the collar of his jacket, which appears dark and long. His hands are shoved deep into his pockets. He does not look at the camera. He does not break stride. He turns a corner and disappears from view. The route he is taking aligns perfectly with the northern escape path of Runner B. The timing is, to say the least, highly suggestive. Why would a friend and associate of the victim be fleeing the scene minutes after the shooting, rather than rushing toward it or calling for help? Why the deliberate avoidance of the camera's gaze? This digital ghost, this Runner B, was no longer just a pixelated anomaly. He now had a potential name and a potential motive. The smooth, singular narrative of Tyler Robinson's guilt began to look less like a conclusion and more like a lid being pressed down on a boiling pot. Meanwhile, The human element of the tragedy was unfolding in the stark light of the media. The victim's family gave tearful press conferences, pleading for privacy and expressing their faith in the justice system. Tyler Robinson's family maintained his innocence, their voices often drowned out by the public's outrage. And then there was Lance Twigg. His public response was, in a word, impeccably composed. He released a brief, written statement expressing his profound grief and shock. He attended the funeral, sitting in a back row, his face a mask of somber reflection. He gave no interviews. He offered no spontaneous, emotional reactions. His composure was so complete, so seamless, that it struck some observers as unusual. In the wake of such a personal and public tragedy, such controlled behavior can read as detachment, or worse, as calculation. Online, the debate raged. Was he a grieving friend, simply handling his sorrow with dignity? Or was his calm a performance, a carefully maintained facade to deflect suspicion? His very refusal to engage with the growing whispers about him was interpreted by some as evidence of his guilt and by others as the prudent action of an innocent man caught in a nightmare. The division in public perception became a chasm, played out across social media platforms. Twitter threads, thousands of tweets long debated the minute details of the bystander video. Reddit forums were filled with intricate analyses of timelines and motives. The hashtag Justice for Tyler was met with hashtag Don't Rush the Truth. The discourse was often toxic, but at its core was a legitimate and profound unease. The official story felt rushed. The evidence felt incomplete. And the figure of Lance Twigg loomed over the entire case, an unanswered question that the authorities seemed determined to ignore. This growing public dissent found its most powerful voice not in a digital forum, but in a sworn affidavit. A local man, who has chosen to remain anonymous for fear of reprisal, came forward with a testimony that directly contradicted the police's timeline and suspect description. This witness, let's call him David, was in the park that night, walking his dog near the grove of oak trees. In a signed statement provided to this publication, David claims he was much closer to the actual altercation than previously known witnesses. I heard the argument escalate, David's statement reads. It was two men, and it was vicious. I saw one man shove the other. Then the shot rang out. It was so loud, so close. I ducked behind a tree. I saw one man fall. And I saw two people run. Not one. Two. The first one, he went west toward the street. He looked scared. He was tripping over his own feet. But the other, he came right past me, maybe 15 feet away. He was bigger, solid. He was wearing a long, dark coat. And he was holding something down by his leg, something dark and metallic. He never looked at me. He just ran into the trees, toward the north exit. I'll never forget the sound of his footsteps. Heavy, fast, and determined. It wasn't the kid they arrested. I'd bet my life on it. David's account is a bombshell. It corroborates the existence of Runner B. It places an object in that runner's hand. And it explicitly states that the individual was not Tyler Robinson. The critical question then becomes, was David ever interviewed by the police? According to him, no. He states he called the tip line twice in the days following the shooting, but was told his information had been noted and that an investigator would follow up if necessary. No one ever did. His testimony, which could potentially exonerate one man and implicate another, was seemingly lost in the system, deemed irrelevant to a case that was already considered solved. The failure to pursue this lead, or even to properly log it, points to a potentially catastrophic confirmation bias within the investigation. Having quickly settled on Robinson, the police may have subconsciously, or even deliberately, filtered out any evidence that did not fit their theory. Witnesses who didn't corroborate the chosen narrative were discounted. Video footage that complicated the timeline was ignored. The case against Tyler Robinson was not being built from the ground up by following the evidence wherever it led. It was being constructed from the top down, with the evidence being selectively chosen to fit a preordained conclusion. This raises the most disturbing and politically charged question of all. Was Tyler Robinson a scapegoat? The pressure on law enforcement to solve a high-profile case involving a prominent citizen is immense. The public, the media, and City Hall all demand a swift resolution. In such a pressurized environment, the path of least resistance is often the most tempting. Robinson, with his history and his witnessed argument, was a perfect candidate. He fit the profile. Pursuing Lance Twigg, a man with deeper pockets and more complex connections, promised a longer, messier, and more politically fraught battle. The theory is cynical, but it is not without precedent. The desire for narrative closure can, at times, overshadow the more difficult pursuit of factual truth. The evidence, or lack thereof, continues to pile up. Freedom of Information Act requests for all park surveillance footage have been denied, citing an ongoing investigation. Requests for the full list of witnesses interviewed have been similarly rejected. The cell phone pinging data, which could trace the movements of everyone in the park that night, including Lance Twigg, remains under seal. This wall of silence is not just a frustration, it is an active impediment to justice. Transparency is the antiseptic that cleanses the wounds of public doubt, and in this case, the authorities have chosen opacity. As the preliminary hearing for Tyler Robinson approaches, the air is thick with tension. The prosecution is expected to present its streamlined case, a straight line from argument to gunshot to flight. The defense, however, is now armed with the digital evidence of Runner B, the sworn testimony of David, and the troubling figure of Lance Twigg. They will argue that the police investigation was myopic and fatally flawed, that they arrested the most convenient suspect while the real perpetrator walked away. The tragedy in Parkland Common has become a rift, exposing the fragile trust between the public and its institutions. It is a story about how justice, in the modern age, is no longer solely determined in courtrooms, but also in the court of public opinion, fueled by digital evidence and a deep-seated hunger for truth. The official narrative of Tyler Robinson's sole guilt is collapsing under the weight of its own inconsistencies. The ghost in the machine has a name. The witness has spoken. The footage exists. The question is no longer just about what happened that night. It is about what happens now. Will the wheels of justice, once set on a convenient track, be wrenched onto the more difficult path toward the truth? The call for a full, transparent, and independent review of all evidence is growing into a demand. The release of all video footage, the full timeline, the phone records, and the unredacted reports is not a request. It is a necessity for a society that claims to value justice. This story is a living entity, and its next chapter is being written now. The silence from official channels is deafening, but it is being challenged by the persistent, collective voice of a public that refuses to accept a comfortable lie. The real story of the Parkland tragedy is still waiting to be told. What is being hidden? Who is Lance Twigg, and what does he know? The answers to these questions will determine more than the fate of one man. They will define the integrity of the system itself. The investigation continues. The search for truth is far from over.